September 12, 1944. The rough mountains of northern Italy. The air hangs thick with dust and the metallic scent of tension. Sergeant Major Arthur Art Jenkins, 32, wipes sweat from his brow, leaving a streak of grime. He is an administrative veteran from Atlanta, Georgia, now serving in the 92nd Infantry Division, the famed Buffalo Soldiers. His purpose is maintaining order in a unit designed for chaos. His uniform, despite the heat, feels heavy not just from the canvas and wool, but from the weight of expectation and, worse, the weight of prejudice. Above him, the mountains rear up, steep and unforgiving. Crowned by the ultimate German defensive position, the Gothic Line, or Linear Gotica, this is the last great barrier protecting the Axis forces in northern Italy. The line is bristling with machine gun nests, minefields, and deep concrete bunkers. It is supposed to be impenetrable. Art looks at the maps, then looks at his men. Exhausted after months of relentless fighting up the Italian boot, his unit is the 92nd, the only all-black infantry division to see combat in Europe during World War II. They were assigned the narrow, difficult coastal flank that the white commanding officers considered secondary, a place where a less experienced division could be contained. The contradiction is immediate and bitter. The U.S. Army labeled them second-rate soldiers, incapable of victory. Yet they are standing at the feet of the Gothic Line, ready to attempt what many considered a white man's task. Everything was a lie. But before we dive deeper into this incredible, untold story that history tried to bury, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. This is the Gothic Line. This is one of the most heavily fortified, continuous defensive lines ever constructed by the German Wehrmacht, stretching 200 miles across the Apennine Mountains. Think about that. The date is June 1944. The 92nd Infantry Division, including the 370th, 371st, and 372nd Infantry Regiments, arrives in Italy. These men, many of them, educated professionals and skilled laborers from places like New York, Detroit, and St. Louis, were segregated from the moment they enlisted. They were often given subpar equipment and subjected to racist scrutiny by their senior white officers. Records show the unit suffered from low morale, exacerbated not by the enemy, but by the relentless, humiliating discrimination from within the ranks. First Lieutenant Jesse Banks, 25. Jesse is a commissioned officer from Detroit, Michigan. Before the war, he was a high school science teacher who joined the officer training corps believing the uniform would grant him respect. He is idealistic, but constantly frustrated. His primary fight isn't against the Germans, but against the white officers who refuse to give him command authority over white troops. Despite his rank, Jesse dialogue, quiet frustration, they give us the worst terrain, the oldest trucks, and they constantly question our courage. We're fighting against Hitler, but we're also fighting against the colonel's bigotry. Everything was a lie. Private First Class Lorenzo Lowe Vance, 20. Lowe is a private from Harlem, New York. He used to be a jazz club musician playing saxophone. He's young, cynical, and joined the army only because he was drafted. He represents the common soldier's view, resigned to prejudice, but committed to performance. He is assigned to the 370th Infantry Regiment. The irony is profound. The 92nd was stationed on the Ligurian coastal sector, a narrow, treacherous zone that German Field Marshal Albert Kesselring considered too difficult for a major Allied push. Kesselring assumed the Allies would use the 92nd for light defense and reconnaissance. It's a perfect place to contain a Negro division where failure wouldn't impact the main thrust. Think about that. The German High Command held a racist assumption that mirrored the U.S. Army's own internal bias. This mutual underestimation of the Buffalo Soldiers would soon prove fatal to the Axis defense. German Hauptmann Dieter Vogel, 38. Vogel is a seasoned Wehrmacht captain from Stuttgart, Germany. He commands a company holding a key defensive position on the Gothic Line. He is disciplined, tired, and fully indoctrinated in the belief that the Americans rely on technology, not fighting spirit. His official intelligence briefings describe the coastal sector opposition as low-grade colonial infantry. Records show that in early skirmishes, some 92nd units underperforming led to widespread criticism in the U.S. press. This was a direct result of inadequate training time, segregated leadership, and the low morale fostered by the system. The High Command was ready to write them off. October 1944. The Ligurian Apennines. Italy. The major push against the Gothic Line is failing in the Central Mountains. Allied commanders realize they must break the line somewhere, anywhere, to prevent the stalemate from turning into disaster. They look at the narrow, impossible coastal sector. December 26, 1944. Fosso del Mortel, Italy. The 92nd is given a new, crucial objective: take the heights overlooking the Cinquale Canal and penetrate the western edge of the Gothic Line. This isn't a diversion anymore. It's a desperate necessity. Art Jenkins, the sergeant major, stands by the radio as orders come in. He sees the fear and doubt in the white officer's eyes, but a different look in the faces of his black corporals. A fierce, quiet determination. Private Lovance's company, Company C, 370th Infantry, is ordered to advance across a flooded riverbed and scale a heavily fortified ridge known as Fosso del Mortel. It is a suicide mission if the German defense holds firm. Lowe and his comrades are crawling through thick mud, the German shells kicking up geysers of water and dirt around them. The enemy fire is coming from Captain Vogel's position. Vogel dialogue. Screamed in broken German over the radio, reconstructed. They are advancing. They are crossing the swamp. They cannot be the Negro division. They fight like elite troops. Where is this spirit coming from? The spirit is coming from shame and resolve. The men know that if they fail here, the entire division will be permanently discredited. They fight with an intensity born of two fights: fascism abroad and racism at home. Lt. Jesse Banks, moving with a forward platoon, sees a machine gun nest tearing into his men. He grabs a satchel charge from a fallen soldier. Jesse dialogue, shouting over the noise. They told us we couldn't lead. Watch this, gentlemen. Jesse single-handedly charges the nest, destroys the position, and clears the path for his unit, securing the ridge. This is the turning point. The 92nd broke through a section of the Gothic Line previously thought impassable. Not just holding ground, but advancing deep into the mountains. Captain Vogel, watching the advance from a trench, is stunned. He sees the discipline, the heavy fire, and the willingness to incur massive losses for the objective. Vogel internal monologue. They fight like Prussians. My intelligence was corrupted by lies. If these are the American reserves, the war is lost. Everything was a lie. The successful breach allows the entire Allied Fifth Army to shift resources and eventually break the main line in the spring of 1945. The 92nd had done what other units, hampered by the difficult terrain, had failed to do. January 1945, near Lucca, Italy. Despite the operational success, the immediate aftermath of the Gothic Line breach was characterized by both heroism and tragedy. The 92nd suffered heavy casualties. Their success was often minimized by official channels. The irony persists. While the men of the 92nd proved their mettle, the military establishment still hesitated to give them full credit. Archives contain records of initial after-action reports that praised the courageous action of the troops, but simultaneously recommended that African-American units should continue to be assigned limited roles of profound cognitive dissonance. Lovance, after recovering from shrapnel wounds, received a Silver Star. He wrote to his father in Harlem in a letter dated February 1945. "Pop, we won the mountain they said we couldn't climb. We held the line they said we couldn't break. The only thing they can't break is our spirit. Even if they won't put a medal around a black man's neck that doesn't feel ashamed of its own color." Lt. Jesse Banks received a battlefield promotion for his actions. He realized the uniform would not grant him respect. He had to take it. He used his legal training to write scathing letters to command after the war, detailing the discrimination the unit faced. In a 1951 interview for an NACP publication, Jesse stated, "When the bullets fly, the color of a man's skin doesn't stop the shrapnel. and it doesn't stop the fear. But it did stop the praise. We conquered Hitler's best defense, yet we had to come home and fight for a seat on the bus. We fought for two freedoms. The military cover-up persisted for decades. Documents reveal that high-ranking officials deliberately failed to properly process recommendations for medals of honor for several black soldiers from the 92nd, including Private First Class George T. Bush and Sergeant John A. Funderburg, whose actions matched those receiving the highest honors. British historian Anthony Burgess, in his 2001 study, The Unseen Front, the Black Italian Campaign, was key in highlighting this institutional suppression of honor. The story of the 92nd Infantry Division conquering the Gothic Line was not forgotten by the soldiers or by the Italians they liberated, but it was suppressed by the American military narrative. It took over 50 years for the highest honors to be corrected. In 1997, Military Review Board finally acknowledged the racial discrimination in the original awards process. 7 black soldiers from World War II were awarded the Medal of Honor, including 2 from the 92nd, First Lieutenant Vernon Baker and Staff Sergeant Edward A. Carter, Jr., who had both performed astonishing acts of heroism in the spring push that followed the Gothic Line breakthrough. Today, on the hills near Massa, Italy, where the 92nd fought its toughest battles, a local memorial stands dedicated to the Buffalo Soldiers, placed there not by the U.S. government initially, but by grateful Italian civilians. This is a monument to resolve. This story matters now because it proves that efficiency and victory are undermined by prejudice. The U.S. Army's commitment to segregation nearly cost them the entire Italian front. It was the grit, professionalism, sheer courage of the men they marginalized that ultimately saved the campaign. Sergeant Major Art Jenkins, reflecting on his time in Italy in a letter dated March 1973, summarized the struggle. We were better soldiers because we had to be. We had to conquer the mountain, and then we had to conquer the lie that said we couldn't climb it. The human heart, when pushed against a wall, only knows one color: courage. That is the true legacy of the 92nd Division.